So now we've heard a lot about how organizations are adapting their M&E practices. So I just wanted to mention what ALNAP is doing going forward and our role in a few broader initiatives. So ALNAP is supporting the Global COVID-19 Evaluation Coalition, which is primarily a forum for governments and multilateral organizations that is promoting joint evaluations. So you can check out their site for further details. A link should be appearing in the chat box now. And there are plans for the Global Coalition to work on future evaluation synthesis to learn wider lessons from international response. One of the joint evaluations taking place under the umbrella of the coalition is a global evaluation of refugee protection during the pandemic, for which ALNAP is participating in the management group for. Another notable evaluation looking at the system-wide response is soon to be launched, Interagency Humanitarian Evaluation on COVID-19 Response, with ALNAP again participating in the management group. Lastly, as many of you will know, ALNAP hosts the largest humanitarian database with evaluation reports, and we also have a COVID-19 portal. Many actors, including the Global Coalition and IAHE, plan to use ALNAP's online evaluation library for future evidence synthesis work and research purposes. So I would like to remind all of you to upload your organization's evaluations to ALNAP's help library. It is a really important resource and for wider learning purposes as well. So a link to the help library and the COVID-19 portal should also now be appearing in the chat box. So following this webinar, we're going to share the recording with you in mid-April alongside the research papers that underpinned each of our skills building workshops. We've noted the renewed interest in real-time evaluations from various real-time learning exercises. So ALNAP is currently working on a short research paper to capture experiences and lessons from recent real-time evaluations. So more details on that to follow, so keep a lookout. In the meantime, you can keep the conversation going in our M&E community of practice. A link should be appearing in the chat box now. We won't have time to answer all of the questions that I'll put to our panelists now, and any we don't get to answer, I'll take forward to our community of practice. So I've seen a few interesting questions come up in our Q&A. I think most of them have been answered as well, but one in particular stood out to me. So that's from Yui Chorus. So what information do we have about the influence COVID has had on participation of marginalized groups in evaluation activities? So I think, Ricardo, you provided an answer in the Q&A box, but I would like you to briefly speak to that, if that's okay.
Okay, so basically this has been a major challenge. And what we have done, we've done socioeconomic impact with consultations through digital platforms and networks that already existed. Now, this is a huge issue because not all the most marginalized communities have access to phones nor to internet under the current circumstances, especially in those countries where you have lockdown measures in place or partial lockdowns, where generally the most marginalized are. We also have experimented in some countries, such as the Dominican Republic, some crowd seeding and crowdsourcing with the National Statistics Office, which is an innovation over there, where we've done a socioeconomic impact in the region with 13 countries out of the 24 country offices we have in the region. And then what we've done, for instance, in the real-time assessment of the COVID response that we did in our region in Venezuela, Argentina, El Salvador, and the Dominican Republic, what we did, we relied essentially on secondary data, which was being collected from sources such as the situational analysis or social economic impact assessments to not to overburden national communities, because there is also an over consultation by a number of actors, and you need to avoid having that, because otherwise it becomes a huge bottleneck. Now, how do you amplify this over time? In Cambodia, we did back in the days, in the first months of the pandemic, we did a really interesting thing on monitoring the behavior and triangulating the behavioral change with different sources. But again, it was critical to have access both to internet and to the phone to get to the local community level. And not everybody in the community does have that nowadays. Over to you.
Thank you, Ricardo. There's another interesting question that's come up here. Let me just find it again. So during the workshops, Alex Tiernan wrote that it emerged that evaluations during COVID-19 shifted from more accountability focused to learning focused. So do we think this trend will prevail going forward? So I'll ask maybe Wendy and Margie to respond to that very briefly. So Wendy, any thoughts on this trend going forward?
Yeah, I think the trend will probably prevail, and not just because COVID creates a lot of challenges of rapid adaptation, and therefore also evaluations have to be more learning oriented during this process of adaptation, and evaluators have to be much closer to the action, so to speak, if they want to be of use and be able to sort of engage with policymakers for learning purposes. But I also think that the challenges and the complexities of the SDG challenges will invite much more learning-oriented evaluations. It might depend on the national political setting, but I certainly see this need for much more learning-oriented, as opposed to just merely accountability in hindsight oriented evaluations. That's my experience, and also my hope.
Thank you, Wendy. And same question I'll put to Margie.
Yeah, thanks, Samir. I think this is a really interesting one, and I think it'll be also up to agencies, evaluation functions, all of us in the evaluation community to demonstrate just how valuable these more learning-oriented evaluations actually are. So I think if we can demonstrate how taking a more learning-oriented approach really results in adaptive and more flexible and ultimately more effective programming, then I think that will help to push evaluation in that direction, which I think would be a really good thing. And there is a space right now for much more developmental evaluations. I mean, we know that WFP, for example, is very explicitly using a developmental evaluation approach in its COVID COVID response evaluation right now, with the input of Michael Quinn Patton. And I think if we can demonstrate just how useful and valuable these more kind of, it's a little bit more creative. I think they're more creative approaches very often. And I think this last year has invited us in this community to be much more creative. And I think that's a really good thing, because I think it goes back to what Ricardo was saying. It's inviting and encouraging us to think outside the box. And that's when we'll get some of the best results.
Thank you, Margie. I think that's all we have time for today, I'm afraid. So I could see that all of the questions have been answered in the Q&A. There's a couple that have just come up now, but perhaps we'll take them forward in our community of practice. So I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our guest speakers today. And you could continue this conversation in our community of practice. And thank you to all of the audience as well for joining us. And I hope you found it to be a useful discussion. Until next time, have a good day.